All right, we are live on another edition of P5Live Sessions. What are we going to get into today? We are going to start with a brand new sketch. And I thought it would be interesting to play with circular buffers. As far as I know, I haven't played with one of these directly for an improv session. And circular buffers are really interesting. Let me just get something moving on the screen. Let's get an ellipse floating across the page. Frame count divided by modular width. Height divided by 2, 150. So we have something moving on the screen. And a circular buffer, let's say no fill. A stroke that is white. There we go. A circular buffer just kind of is constantly trashing something. It's like looping on itself while constantly trashing something, the very first one that it created. So actually this may not be a true circular buffer the way that I intend to do it, but it could be interesting just to see where we could go with that. Just basically storing a bunch of things. So this is like the teaser while I write some code to make this buffer. So to do that, I'm going to need one global thing. I'm going to call it let chords. Maybe I can make it shorter. Let's call it, what do I want to call this thing? Circular buffer. Let's call it CB. Is just an empty array. And then I'm going to say let CB max be, let's start out with just a maximum of 50 things. And then I'm going to throw things into there. I'm going to say cb.push, create a vector of my mouse X, mouse Y, which should quickly just be filling up. And then to make sure I don't get too many of these things, I'm going to say if cb.length is more than this cb max, trash them. So cb.splice, I think the 0 index and 1 item. Let me see, print cb.length. Awesome, there's 51 things there. So maybe this should be equals to, and then I'll get 50. Is more than, I guess I could go -1. No, the other way. Equals. There we go, it stops at 50. Okay, so now I want to actually draw these things. So this is like a nice way that I can just constantly be throwing something new into it while circling around. And I'm going to draw those things. For let C of CB. This is like a little shorthand loop, which may or may not be a good idea. Let's draw an ellipse where they are. C.x, C.y, and like 50. There we go. So let me take away the fade, take away our moving circle for a minute. Here I have a nice little kind of circular buffer. It may or may not be a circular buffer. I think a circular buffer might, how would it be different? Maybe it wouldn't be different. I'm not quite sure if that would definitely keep the exact same items and loop them around versus constantly trashing one. Not quite sure, but anyways, I think this should work for what I want to do. And then I'm going to make each one I, take it back. I think it is good to have I as a counter in here. So let's write this loop a little bit different. I is less than cb.length, I plus plus. Let C equals cb I. Should be the same thing. And then I'll say fill is 255, but if I modulo 2. So every other one, fill black. Ooh, that causes crazy chaos. I think I don't quite want to do that. That'll do the same thing. I think I need to propagate them, like fill it in as I create them. So I think I'm going to say This is for the Z axis. I'll give it the fill, although I maybe wanted to store other stuff, but let's just do this. I'm going to say that is frame count modulo 2 times 255. Let's see if that works. And then see if I can say C dot Z. There we go. Okay, let's make this thing a little bit bigger. The very first one is flashy. So I think I want to somehow make that a bit calmer. So I'm going to say I need some if statement, like if I equals 0, then fill is black. It's the exact opposite. If I is equal to cb dot length minus 1. There we go. Yeah, so this this lets me play with, like, yeah, I could have different lengths that I'm storing and holding on to. So there it's kind of a much longer tube structure. But what gets interesting is then, because I'm keeping track of those positions, you can manipulate each one individually. So I'm going to say it's this minus I, for example. Ooh, and then these things are creating interesting, like, worm growths. Let's see what it's like without a stroke. Let's say no stroke. Yeah, it creates a nice trippy worm. I've done something like this some years ago in processing with, like, a slingshot kind of thing I should rebuild at some point in P5 for the browser. But what else could this thing do? This is like slinky worm. Maybe it's interesting to say, maybe I should check what a noisy worm would be like. Let me copy, paste, turn one off, and say this is actually noise of frame count times something slow times 150. And then you can see everything is growing together. I'm not sure what the right speed is. And then use I times 5 to get each one a bit different. That's a lot different. What about 0.5? Ooh, there we go. 0.05. Yeah, now it kind of looks like a weird worm that's like swallowing something as it moves around. Let me turn off the background for a bit and see what that's like if we leave a trace. That's kind of cool because we get like almost an exoskeleton of the line until it disappears. Yeah, I think we could exploit this quite a bit. So I'm gonna not forget to save this thing and give it a name. Let's call this what is this? Circ buffer. And I'm already going to clone it because I think that's kind of fun, just that initial early stage. So let's get a background to fade that stuff out. And now it's a question, where exactly should this thing go? What should it be doing? It might be interesting to set this thing on a path of its own. Right now it needs my mouse, which is nice, because then I could do like a weird hello warble. That's quite cool. Save a picture of that. Let me make sure I have a background all the time here. Background. And I'm going to let the max be higher and see what happens. See how many I can get away with. Oop, let's have even more. So that it would be nice if these letters were sort of continuously wobbling. Let's just try 450, see what the fan says. Yeah, it's interesting. It's super slow while it's building up those elements, and then it gets really fast once it's had them. Yeah, this would be quite interesting to let this thing just kind of walk around, and maybe it's nice to have multiple of these walkers going. This will get quite trippy. And then it's a question, how big should these things be allowed to get? Okay, let's make it fewer again. Let's fade our background back in. Zoop. Yeah, maybe while building this thing up, it's not bad to have a background. It gives also like a weird little fade. And instead of being my mouse, let's try copy, paste, whoops. Let's have it do like a circular motion, sine. Actually, let's get the same. Let's set some values in there. Let x equal sine frame count boop 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 times 0.05 times let's do height divided by 3 and a cosine, so I can make a circular motion, and I'll say this is x and y. They're going in perfect speed, and now I have to just translate everything. So just to be safe, I'm going to push and pop in case there's other stuff I'm going to draw, and translate to the center. There we go. And now I should let these things get bigger, and the noise should move even slower. So 0.5, if that made a difference. It's even bigger, but this seems like that doesn't seem to make a big difference. It's more about this value here, I guess. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I can really control like how chaotically different they are from each other, but there it's just like a little bit of a warble. Kind of got a stripy donut going. And then what did I want to do? That was like that motion. Could be interesting to change this into ratios. Ouroboros. I don't know what that is. I think I have to look it up. Ooh, there we can have an infinity in a particular phase. Yeah, so maybe it's interesting to already put this thing into a class so that I can start having multiple of these hanging out on the page. Maybe it's interesting as well to play with a fade of it. Let's see, I forget, there's a clever way that you can like manipulate this color, because this is just a single value. Oh wait, it's a single value. What am I talking about? I could just add some alpha to it, which doesn't look so good, but worth trying. Nope, no alpha, full color. Yep, let's turn this into a class and see what that is like to have a couple of these things moving about. So let's make a class called, what's this thing called? This is going to be called a circular buffer. Let's call it a circ buffer with a constructor and probably a display. And now let's move all that fun stuff in there and have a whole lot of this. Probably can just copy paste. Actually, not quite so much. Let's do this and swap everything to a this. And then we need to do that in the display. Let's clean it up once and say this dot push. Actually, I don't think that's right. We don't need to this push. We don't need to translate. We need to Just the values. Where are they? This.cb. And that is again this.cb. That's fine. That's fine. CB, this. That might be enough. Let's find out. If I say we don't have these CBs, but let's create one of them and say let CBS for a whole bunch of CBs. This is getting abstract with the language. CBS.push, and I didn't tell it needed anything fed into it because it's at the moment the same, so I'll just say a new circ buffer. And then at once I'm going to turn off all this stuff and show this other thing. Say CBS0.display, and I should see it there. Let's hope. If I turn all this off, no, where is it? Make sure I'm calling everything the right name. New circ buffer. This CB. Height, weight, display. That looks funny. The coloring hasn't changed. Constructor. There must be a typo in here. Class. Is it an uppercase? No, it's a C. Lowercase. Let's bring this back so something is happening. Just kidding. And so that we could tell that this thing worked, I'm going to make it red. That way we'll know when it's showing up. And I'll translate a little bit off skew so when it's working I can see it. Let's see, CBS push a new circ buffer. CBS. And then CBS0 display. Strange, if I say print CBS dot length, there is one, that is correct. Display. Oh, where's the typo? Maybe I should just look at a console, that might help. There we go. Let's clear it once. Great, that doesn't help. Nope. There must be a weird bug in here. CBS.push. This CB. It's not pushing any values into it. I forgot to copy that line of code. How did I miss that? There we go. And also, these all need to be inside of the display. Cut. CB, oops, we need a this. And we need a this and a this. This. Yay, there we go. Alright, so now there's two instances of this thing. I can turn off this unclass one. Let's get rid of that. Poof. Let's get rid of that. This was all for that previous stuff. Let's clone this thing once, now that we have a class. Give it a clone and rename it. Class. Alright, now the question is what these things should do differently than each other, and maybe it's interesting to set a couple values of what goes into this thing, like a max size, maybe a max length of this. I think I'm going to let this thing, instead of doing a circle, I'm going to let it do like some kind of walking around. I'm going to say noise / frame count times 0.01 times width. And now this thing can kind of run around the page. Except it's I'm translating, so I can probably turn off the translate, or minus width divided by 2 in case I want to do some rotation and 3D stuff. Let's do the same for the height. white. Let's get rid of this red for now and go back to white, or let it be crazy green. Oh, let's just go back to black and white for now. Start it over. Oh, this dot. There we go. It's a question if the first one should be white or black. Not sure it makes a difference. And these things need different speeds than each other so that the noise is unique. There we go. But it's going pretty fast. Or is it? That might be too slow. Take it back. Okay, that's something that could be in there. So what kind of things do we want to feed this thing? It's going to be told a max. Let's see, it's going to be fed a CB max for how big the buffer is. Maybe a CB size, max size. Maybe I feed it a color. Yeah, maybe there's just like some value. I don't know. Let's like keep it black and white for now. What is something else? Like maybe the speed at which it moves around. Let's call it CB speed. And now I'm going to plug these things in. So that becomes CB max. Let's make a this dot CB size is CB size. Plug it in to the max size it's allowed to be. That's interesting too. This value here maybe should be messed with. So CB speed, this dot CB speed equals CB speed. This I wanted to use here for the speed of the noise, and maybe it should be like that plus 0.01. No, I should do like times 1.01, just so that's a little bit different. Otherwise we get a perpendicular parallel line. No, a diagonal line. And this is practically the same value, so let's see what happens if... Yeah, we'll plug it in after. It's not happy about that guy right there. Frame count times this dot speed. Where do I have a typo? I lost it. There. No, what happened? Lost what happened. This dot speed. Ah, there it is. And then this should be the same thing but similar. This dot speed times 1.01. Okay, let's try building one of these things, and now I need to tell it the max size. So the number was going to be like 50, the max size 200, the speed 0.01. There we go. And then we can push two of these things and make them a bit different. And then I need to view each one of these things. So for let CB of CBS, super minimal acronym letters, but it makes it easy to not have to type too much. There we go. There's the two different ones. And they're kind of plain, and one will maybe be shorter than the other. And then maybe need a bit more of a difference in speed. 0.05, one will be much slower, and one will be much bigger. And turn off the background and see what happens with these things. Maybe they should have actually quite longer tails. And maybe not get so big. Actually, the longer one will be smaller, the shorter one will be double its size. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so a wandering worm is just like one way to use this thing. Could be interesting to pull it into 3D. Because the advantage of not being in 3D is this kind of trace behind. But in 3D, then we get to rotate this thing because we're actually keeping track of all those positions. So that could be quite interesting to test out. So let's clone this thing. And clone it. And now we're gonna bring this into 3D and see what happens. WebGL. Okay, I'll go back to just a single one. And then maybe we'll add more inputs to it. That's a really nice effect that happens where this leg is there and shrinks away. That's something worth exploiting in another way. Taking this in a different direction, but let me make this a WebGL and then I can turn off the translate. Alright, so now we are technically in 3 dimensions. And let's see what this looks like by rotating around. Rotate Y. Because, whoa. Yeah, interesting. Now we get all kinds of Z-axis fighting. These circles are crashing into each other, which can be an interesting effect. It's fun to take advantage of. They're going a little chaotic, but maybe if I have this go super slow around, then we can really see and appreciate those weird glitches. It might also be nice to leave the background off so it can trace that stuff out, but it is a little bit big. But I want to avoid that, plus I want to take advantage of 3D space, so we are going to separate these things from each other. I stole the C value for a color, so that's kind of a bummer to not use that for X position, but what I could do is I think I move the push and pop inside of here. And then I translate to, let's say, translate C.X, C.Y, C.X divided by 2. Let's see what that's like just to recycle that value. And maybe not even divided by 2. So now we're playing in a 3-dimensional value. That's why we're not getting that Z-axis fighting, because they actually are separate from each other. I can speed up the rotation a bit. And then we're in 3D. We don't have to draw circles, although it could be interesting to have a circle and rotate it on another axis. Rotate X, radians, radians. Frame count plus I. Oh, I have to recreate it. There we go. Now it creates a quasi-calligraphic twisting, of which we got to turn off the background all the time to let things leave traces for us. Quite nice when it comes zooming at the camera. There we go. It makes it off to the left side. Yeah, it has a little bit of like a bleeding out of those patterns. But will be interesting to test out with some 3D shapes in that place of a circle. Okay. Got a couple nice shots. Let's turn the background back on and change these out for a box. And the size of the box could be maybe this 150 minus I. Let's try that again, this shrinking, growing thing. And yeah, let's leave the rotation on. Yeah, it's interesting with the box form, we get this interesting geometry where those lines mash into each other. The noise might be moving a little fast all over the place. I'm going to slow it down a bit and see what that does. And I'm going to let it get even bigger. And that very last one is maybe causing seizures, so I'm going to also control it and say or I equals 0. And then there we go. That way the very first and last one are a solid color rather than this flashing, which can be nice but harsh if afflicted. So let's make this even bigger and turn off the background and see what happens. Actually, maybe one should be black and one should be white. We'll see. Yep, otherwise it's erasing everything that was there. So I think what I need to do is tweak this if statement, make it its own if statement. If that, else if this, do that. Kind of a bummer. Either direction ends up just covering it up. And what was it like if I didn't do this thing and it had that flash in it? Interesting. Okay, let's go back and maybe the fill is that, but give it a white stroke. Stroke 255. Stroke 255. Just so that it leaves some kind of a pattern instead of just nothing. But I think everything has a stroke right now. No, it doesn't. It's turned off there. Yeah, and actually since I'm using the same thing, I can just merge it together. But maybe later I change it. And how much do these things wander around? At the moment, it's allowed to go as much as width divided by 2. Let's make a sphere once. Wow, that makes a wild pattern. Interesting where those things rip into each other. What if I... Do I need to have this outer one? Yes, I do. Damn. Yeah, it'd be a lot nicer to not need that. I wonder if I can just say if it does not equal 0, then do all this stuff. Is that a thing? Just not draw that last one. I don't think it makes a difference. Nope, it'll still be there. Whoop whoop. Yeah, let's get 2 of these things going. Back to boxes. And maybe make some gigantic, even bigger. Let's see what it's like if it can be really big. I'm going to rotate a little bit faster. With a background to see those things go. Let's add yet another one. Yeah, they really need to have a z-axis that lets them go into other space, so maybe they need to have their own, a separate buffer just for dealing with color and whatnot. So let's create a this.call equals that and do the same thing. This.call.splice 0, 1. Create a z. Whoops. That has its own speed. Its own amount that it can move, and plug it in. This.z. And then I can say this.call.push, simply this value for the color. And then I could say this dot, let's see, this dot, no, actually I don't need to do that. I could just plug it in and say the fill is this dot calls I, because they should have the same size. There we go. Yes, now technically their z's. Z-axis should be more unique in doing its own thing. They still look very stuck on the z-axis, actually. Ah, because I'm not plugging it in yet. There we go. I have to use z. There we go. Yes, now we've got these flying boxes in space. What is it like if I turn these from a box to a plane? Could be interesting. If that's, whoops, a plane. You'll need another dimension. We can make these kind of like sticks in the air. And it's like drawing a scroll, more like a calligraphy. Would be interesting to see how many of these things I can get away with. The fan is kind of kicking. Let's make one really big one and one short one. Turn off the background for a minute. Change up the rotation. So now we're like rolling in it, kind of smearing these stripes along, spin it on the z-axis, just leaving artifacts behind. Let's see what it's like with this movement and using a box, 150-I, whoops, I. If we spin boxes in this direction, it could be interesting to put the camera a bit more inside of there so we're surrounded by the things. As well as I'm curious to test out what is it like if this is a stroke and there is no fill. That leaves like really smudgy. Oh, that's interesting. Let's say no fill, no fill. So it's just leaving a lot of small artifacts. This is the compression tester. Okay, but not so clear what is happening. Let's go back to those bold shapes. Turn off the stroke for a minute. Let's see, where do we want to take this thing? Let's turn that back on. And think about what else this thing should do. It would be nice if they had different kinds of movement instead of just being based on noise. Let me copy these lines and bring back the sine wave just to see what that looked like instead. Do the same thing for the z-axis. Although that was quite cool having the z-axis be on a noise, actually. Let's put it back. That's interesting. So it's kind of noisy if it's going on the inside or the outside, but it's doing this clear circular shape. That's creating a fancy trippy donut. Well, that falls in and out of sync. Let's turn off the background again. Yep, interesting idea to add some alpha to the color. I'll try it again. I tried it before, but it ended up turning into a gray. But now that we're in 3D, I'll give it another try. Let me get a screenshot of this as it spins around. And these things aren't getting so wide. Maybe because everything was based on the height. So if I did width, I could let us be inside of those things. I think that helps to fill the space a bit more instead of just to the height. Yeah, but let's try transparency once. See if the fan accepts it, because I know transparency can be pretty rough on the computer. Let's see, 50. I can already see it slowing a little bit. Yeah, but that makes quite an interesting thing. I mean, I really like this harsh black and white grid, but it's quite cool to see inside of these different forms with some transparency. Let's try 100. And let's trace it out once. It's probably also worth letting these boxes get way bigger, and maybe they don't need to have such a long trace, such a long tail. So like 50, 150 could be enough. And let's do width times 2, just because. And let's make a really small one, like 50 or 100. I think now I don't see those boxes getting very big just yet. Why not? The CB size is about there. Because I plugged in 150 there. I'm not even using CB size. So this should be this dot CB size and see what happens. It's going to get huge. Yep, that was too big. Times 0.5 times 0.2. Let's see what that's like. Still probably too big. Yeah, a lot of these things crashing into each other. Let's turn off the alpha for a minute and see what it's like when it leaves that trace behind, if it's not too chaotic. I think these shouldn't be allowed to get quite so big. Maybe it's worth rotating on another axis as well. keep them all the same. Well, it's nice where it leaves that kind of pixelated structure. Yeah, it's quite interesting seeing these things kind of chase each other in a circle. I wonder what happens if I give them the opposite for their stroke, what effect that'll have on stroke 255 minus. What effect it has on the tracing out. A bit different, leaves more edges. I think more has to be happening to the Z right now. It's just getting like a little bit of wobble. Let's add some different value for what controls it. Let's have it go back to being like a cosine kind of thing and add a different ratio. Because at the same ratio, it's going to be kind of a perfect circle. But if I make it double or so, let's make it 1, then it'll go up and down twice for every time it goes around. So we start to get some bent forms. Or maybe even 2 times. There we go. Getting some waves in motion. That starts to make a interesting form. I think they still need to be offset from each other more, because they're pretty much sitting on top of each other. So maybe I could even do that just when I display them. I could give them a unique offset. Let's do a push and a pop. Translate 0, 0. I don't have a counter here. Let C equals 0, C++, and C times 100 or 200, 500. There we go. So now they're offset 500 from each other. They're following similar structures, of which they should have more unique structure to them. And I think it's time to have some orbit control to be able to see the thing. Orbit control 5. So I can control the angle that we're looking at. And now it might be too big, because now we can never really see the whole form unless I rotate like so. So let's go, instead of divided by 3, divided by 5, 5, 5. Rebuild it. Yeah, the bummer is then you don't get something submerging everything. So I think that needs to be a value there. That needs to be a size for these things. I'm going to feed how big these things are into it. I mean, I had the size there. Why do I not use that somehow? I don't know. Let's give it another value. This will be like, I'm actually not using the size at all. I just plugged it in. And if I'm happy with them all being the same size, which I kind of am, let's steal this value and just make that 100. And instead, let's use it here. Times the size. Times the size. Times, whoops. Times the size, and make that a tiny number. So like one of them will be the full width, covering everything up. Let's make that this one. And then one of them will be 0.5 and one will be 0.25. So it's like a small one in the middle. Do I see it in the middle? There it is. Yep, it's that little guy right there. Could be even smaller, so it's really just chilling in the center. A little bit bigger. And of course, color should start to find its way into there just to make these things more unique. It is fun when they like just add up and add up and add up in grayscale. I like what's happening in the back there with these kind of streaks of the thing going by. It's quite interesting. Maybe the size should be a constant. Let's let that be a constant for a minute. So it leaves a bit more of those traces. More checker pattern-y. Yeah, but it takes away some of the dynamics of it. So let's go back to minus I, and we have like 150. Yeah, it's okay. Okay, let's try and introduce color. So let's leave this thing alone. Let's clone it, rename it, and call this colorful. And hope it doesn't break everything if I change to HSB mode. HSB. Good. And now let's introduce shades of color. So I created the color here. And maybe what this needs to be is, I do not know, 25. I'll need to put in an offset for sure there. Oh, whoops, and I need to put in a, let's do this. I need to tell it HSB 100. And then I need to give where I use the color, this fill, it needs some hue and saturation. So hue, saturation, and it should be colorful. There we go. And it's a question if we turn off the stroke for a minute. And then I need an offset for the color into all these things. So I need a CB. Actually, what's a different value? Could I use one of these? Just give it a unique one. CB color. I don't think I'm using that. Color offset. Let's just call it call off. This dot call off. Oh man, let's make this, we don't need CB everywhere. Just call off equals call off. And I'm going to use that to offset what exactly this number is here. So it'll be that plus that. So for the first one, it'll be just 0. The next one, it'll be 20. The next one, it'll be like 40. And we get very colorful. Whoosh. What should those values be? I don't know. I have to test them out. 60. Maybe it's interesting if they're just slightly different than each other. 15. So it's just like slowly fading the colors. Yeah, we have this wild like chasing its tail. And again, that's from this eye. Shrinking them if I don't shrink them anymore. I've got this, this is very pronounced right now, this wave. If I divide it by 2, it won't be quite so cone-like. And maybe they shouldn't be quite so far away from each other. It's kind of a bummer I have to respawn everything when I change my mind here, but that's okay. 0.4, 0.25, 0.3. Yeah, I think I should be using one of these values a bit more. to make sure that those are different than each other, because they're all kind of following the same. Let's see, they're all borrowing the exact same speed from each other. That's not so good. I should probably be introducing this speed here. This speed times 1. What is that like if I use that? And then everything melts. Because I was too slow, times 5, times 5. Interesting seeing those two pieces kind of chase each other. Times 15, times 15. I might be using the wrong value. Gets interesting when you twist it around yourself, but it's not as autonomous anymore. Because what is this speed is this tiny, tiny number there. Instead, I should maybe use the CB size and then a fraction of it, CB size, CB size. And then it's going to need to be a tiny amount of that. Okay. I think that's a little bit better. Now we've got some infinity symbols happening. Yeah, this should not be using black now. It should be using whatever our offset color is. It should be this dot call off 100, 100. So it stays colorful. There we go. Yeah, this is getting a little confusing. I'm confused slowly what these values stood for. Ah, wait, I lost the black in between. No, maybe not. 20. Yeah, it's a question how big the front and back of that number should be from each other. I could still make it black, but it's actually nice that it's a two-tone. This is maybe the complementary color set. Similar to it. Okay, and now for a last little bang, let's have a bunch of these things created. So let CBS max be, let's make 10 of these things flying around and quickly try to generate that before we quit. For let I0 let's turn off auto compiling for a second. cbs.push. And now I need to get some values in there. So this is going to be like maybe all of them will be 50. This is going to be 0.2 plus I times 0.5, for example. This is going to be, let's just say random 0.01 to 0.005. And this is going to be what, I times 5 away from each other. That should work. And a crazy colorful spectrum. Yeah, lots of color. What if they can get into some shades of it? Yeah, lots of different ways to take this and go run in other directions. These things are covering each other's up. Let me turn off the background for a second. That's what it looks like out there. That's kind of cool as well to see. But a lot of them are missing their tails, or they're just so far spread out. Wait, we got to fix that for a minute. 0.0. Is that about the speed? Yep. Wow, trippy. Yep, lots of different places to take this thing. 0.1. There we go. Tails in space. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Now, synchronously, FYI, I'm going to be taking a little hiatus from the streams. Different conflicts are coming up Tuesday evenings. So it's been super fun the last months doing this. It will be back. Maybe there will be spontaneous ones in the middle. Otherwise, I'll slowly be posting other videos to the channel, getting into other mediums. But thanks so much for hanging out, watching these things synchronously, asynchronously. Hope you enjoyed seeing improvising with me, and see you in the next stream. Cheers.